Yak it to me. Voice of the Web. The Dead Hand. By Seabury Quinn. The fifth Jules de Grandin story, produced by Roland Wiefring. Jules de Grandin passed his coffee cup across the breakfast table for its third replenishment. It seems, my friend, he told me with a serio-comic grimace, as if I exercise some sort of malign influence upon your patients. Here I have been your guest but 2 short weeks, and you all but lose Mademoiselle Drigo, and the so excellent Madame Richards is dead altogether. I'd hardly blame you for Mrs. Richards' death, I comforted as I refilled his cup. She'd suffered from mitral stenosis for the past 2 years, and the last time I examined her I was able to detect a diastolic murmur without my stethoscope. No, her trouble dated back some time before your advent, de Grandin. You are relieved my conscience, he replied. And now you go to offer your condolences to the family. May I accompany you? Always, I have found, there is opportunity for those who will to learn something. But it is the good Sergeant Costello, he exclaimed as a heavy-set man closed the door of the Richards mansion and strode across the wide veranda. ABN, my friend, do not you remember me? He stretched both slender, well-kept hands to the big Irishman. Surely, you have not forgotten. I'll say I ain't, the big detective denied with a welcoming grin. You sure showed us some tricks in the Calmer case, sir. Belike you'd like to give us a lift with this one. He jerked a thumb toward the house he had just quit. It's a bug house in there, Dr. de Grandin. Huh, do you say so? De Grandin's small eyes lit up expectantly. You interest me. Assuredly you shall have such help as I can provide. Come, let us enter. Together we shall shake the facts from this mystery of yours as a mother shakes the stolen cookies from her infant's blouse. By Blue. Willis Richards, financial nabob of our small sub-metropolitan community, stood on the hearthrug of his library, a living testimonial to the truth of the axiom that death makes all men equals. For all his mop of white hair, his authoritative manner, and imposing embonpoint, he was only a bereft and bewildered old man, unable to realize that in his wife's death he had encountered something not to be remedied by his signature on a 5-figure check. Well, Sergeant, he asked with a pitiful attempt at his usual brusque manner, as he recognized Costello at de Grandin's elbow, have you found out anything? No, sir, the policeman confessed, but here's Dr. de Grandin of Paris, France, and he can help us out if anyone can. He's done some mighty fine work for us before, and a French detective. Richard scoffed. In need to get a foreigner to help you find some stolen property. Why, monsieur? De Grandin's angry protest brought the irate financier's expostulation to an abrupt halt. You do forget yourself. I am Jules de Grandin, occasionally connected with the Service de Charite, but more interested in the solution of my cases than in material reward. Oh, Mr. Richards' disgust deepened. An amateur, eh? Costello, I'm ashamed of you, bringing a dabbler into my private affairs. By George, I'll telephone the Blin agency and take the whole case out of your hands. One moment, Mr. Richards, I broke in, relying on my position as family physician to lend strength to my statement. This gentleman is Dr. Jules de Grandin of the Sorbonne, one of Europe's foremost criminologists, and one of the world's greatest scientists. Criminal investigation is a phase of his work, just as military service was a phase of George Washington's, but you can no more compare him with professional detectives than you can compare Washington with professional soldiers. Mr. Richards looked from de Grandin to me, then back again. I'm sorry, he confessed, extending his hand to the little Frenchman, and I shall be very grateful for any help that you can give me, sir. To be entirely frank, he motioned us to seats, and began pacing the floor restlessly. Mrs. Richards' death was not quite so natural as Dr. Trowbridge believes. Though it's true she had been suffering from heart disease for some time, it was not heart disease alone that caused her death. She was scared to death. Literally. I returned from New York, where I'd been attending a banquet of my alumni association, about 2 o'clock day before yesterday morning. I let myself in with my latchkey, and went directly to my room, which adjoined my wife's. I was beginning to undress when I heard her call, and ran into her bedroom just in time to see her fall to the floor, clutching at her throat, and trying to say something about a hand. Ah! De Grandin regarded our host with his sharp cat stare. And then, monsieur. and then fancied I saw something drift across the room, about level with my shoulders, and go out the window. I ran over to my wife, but when I reached her she was dead. The little Frenchman made small deprecating sounds, while he looked at his well-cared-for nails, but otherwise he made no comment. Richards gave him an annoyed look, as he continued. It was not till this morning that I discovered all my wife's jewels, and about $20,000 worth of unregistered securities had disappeared from the wall safe in her room. Of course, he concluded, I didn't really see anything in the air when I ran from my room. That's palpably absurd. Quite obviously, I agreed. Sure, Costello nodded. Not at all, de Grandin denied, shaking his head vigorously. It is entirely possible your eyes did not deceive you, monsieur. Tell us, what was it you saw? Mr. Richards' annoyance deepened to exasperation. It looked like a hand, he snapped. A hand with 4 or 5 inches of wrist attached to it, and no body. You mean to tell me I saw anything like that? Quadiarity demonstrandum, the Frenchman replied softly. What say? Demanded Richards testily. I said, this is a truly remarkable case, monsieur. Well, I want to take a look at my wife's room. Mr. Richards turned to lead the way upstairs, but again de Grandin shook his head. Not at all, monsieur. The good Sergeant Costello has already seen that, he can tell me all I need to know. Me, I shall look elsewhere for the confirmation of a possible theory. Mr. Richards' white thatch fairly bristled. I'll give you 48 hours to accomplish something, you and Costello. Then I'll call up the Blin agency and see what real detectives can do for me. You are more than generous in your allowance, monsieur, de Grandin replied icily. To me, as we left the house, he confided, I should greatly enjoy pulling that one's fat nose, friend Trowbridge. Can you come over to my house at once, doctor? A voice hailed me, as de Grandin and I entered my office. Why, what's the matter, Mr. Kinnan? I asked as I recognized the visitor. Hut! What isn't the matter, doctor? My wife's been in hysterics since this morning, and I'm not sure I shouldn't ask you to commute me to the asylum. Pardon, monsieur, de Grandin exclaimed, this statement. He is vastly interesting, but not particularly enlightening. You will explain yourself, sce pas. Explain? What I mean? How am I going to explain a thing I know's impossible? At 20 minutes after 5 this morning my wife and I saw something that wasn't there, and saw it take the Lafayette Cup, to boot. Sacre nom un petit porc. De Grandin swore. What is it that you say? You saw a thing that was not there, and saw it take a cup of Monsieur le Marquis de Lafayette. None. Not you, but I am of the deranged mind. Friend Trowbridge, look to me, I hear remarks this gentleman has not made. In spite of his own trouble, Kinnan laughed at the little Frenchman's tragic face. I'll be more explicit, he promised. The baby was fretful the entire early part of last evening, and we didn't get to sleep till well after midnight. Along about 5 this morning he woke up on another rampage, and my wife and I went to the nursery to see what we could do. Our maid had gone to New York for the night, and as usual there wasn't a drop of milk ready for the youngster, so I started to pasteurize some for him in the dining room chafing dish. I can place the time exactly, for the library clock has been running erratically of late, and only yesterday I'd gotten it so it ran just 10 minutes fast. Well, that clock had just struck 5:30 when, like an echo of the gong, there came a crash at the window, and the pane was shattered, right before our eyes. You apostrophe M? Observed de Grandin non-committally. Right before our eyes, gentlemen. By a hammer. Ah. De Grandin's interest in the narrative seemed something less than breathless. And whether you believe me or not, that hammer was held in a woman's hand, and that was all. Nobody, just a hand that smashed that window pane with a hammer, and floated through the air, as if it were attached to an invisible body, right across the room to the cabinet where the Lafayette Cup was. It unlatched the cabinet door, took the cup out, and floated out the window with it. How's that for a pipe dream? The only trouble with it is it's true. Ah ha ha! De Grandin exclaimed on a rising accent. Oh, I don't expect you to believe me. I'd say anyone who told me such a wild tale was a candidate for the bug house, but... Au contraire, Monsieur de Grandin denied. I do believe you. For why? Because, mordieu, that same hand without body was seen at Monsieur Richard's house the night his wife died. Eh? The devil. This time it was Quinn who looked skeptical. You say someone else saw that hand? Why, they couldn't. Of course not, agreed Jules de Grandin evenly. Nevertheless, they did, and there is reason to suspect it made away with jewelry and securities. Now tell me, if you please, this Lafayette cup, what was it? It's a silver wine goblet that belonged to my great-great-grandfather, sir. Intrinsically I don't suppose it worth more than $30 or $40, but it's valuable to us, as an heirloom, because Lafayette drank out of it while he was on his second visit to this country. I've been offered up to $1,000 for it by collectors. De Grandin beat his fingertips together in a nervous tattoo. This are a most unusual burglar we have here, Mes Amos. He has a hand, but no body. He enters sick ladies' bedrooms, and frightens them to death. He breaks honest men's windows with a hammer, and steals away the cup of Monsieur le Marquis de Lafayette, while they heat milk for their babies. Carlu, he will bear investigation, this one. You don't believe me, Quinn declared, half truculently, half shamefacedly. Have I not said I do? The Frenchman answered almost angrily. When you have seen such things as I have seen, Monsieur Parbleu, when you have seen one half as much, you will learn to believe many things that fools declare impossible. This hammer he rose, almost glaring at Quinn, so intense with his stare. Where is he? I would see him, if you please. It's over at the house, our visitor replied, lying right where it fell when the hand dropped it. Neither Dorothy nor I would touch it for a farm. Tremendous, gigantic, magnificent. De Grandin ejaculated, nodding vigorously, as he shot out each adjective. Come, my friends, let us hasten, let us fly. Trowbridge, my old friend, you shall attend the so excellent Madame Quinn, while I go upon the trail of this bodiless burglar, and it shall be a matter of remarkableness, if I do not find him. Morbleu, Monsieur le Fantôme, when you slay poor Madame Richards with fright, that is one thing. When you steal Monsieur Quinn's cup of Monsieur le Marquis de Lafayette, that is also one thing. But when you think to thumb your invisible nose at Jules de Grandin Parbleu, that is entirely something else. We shall see who makes a monkey out of whom, and that without unnecessary delay. The hammer proved to be an ordinary one, with nickel-head and imitation ebony handle, such as could be bought at any hardware store, but de Grandin pounced on it like a famished tomcat on a mouse. But this is wonderful, this is superb. He almost cooed, as he swathed the implement in several layers of paper, and sewed it tenderly in the pocket of his greatcoat. Trowbridge, my friend, he threw me one of his quick, enigmatic smiles. Do you attend the good Madame Quinn? I have important duties to perform elsewhere. If possible I shall return for dinner, and if I do I pray that you will have your amiable cook prepare for me one of her so delicious apple tarts. If I should be delayed, his little blue eyes twinkled for a moment with frosty laughter, I shall eat that tart for my breakfast tomorrow, like a good Yankee. Dinner was long since over, and the requested apple tart had been reposing on the pantry shelf for several hours, when de Grandin popped from a taxicab, like a jack-in-the-box from its case, and rushed up the front steps, the waxed ends of his little blonde mustache twitching like the whiskers of an excited cat. Quick, quick, friend Trowbridge, he commanded, as he laid a bulky paper parcel on the office desk, to the telephone. Call that Monsieur Richards, that rich man, who so generously allowed me 48 hours to recover his lost treasures, and that Monsieur Quinn, whose so precious cup of the Marquis de Lafayette was stolen. Call them both, and bid them come here right away, at once, immediately. Mordieu. He strode across the office with a step that was half run, half jig. This Jules de Grandin, he is the sly, clever one. Never is the task imposed too great for him. No, of a certainty. What the devil's biting you? I asked as I rang up the Richards house. None. He waved my question aside, lit a cigarette, and flung it away almost unpuffed. Wait, I entreat you, only wait until those others come, then you shall hear about my monstrous cleverness. The Richards limousine, like its owner impressive in both size and upholstery, was panting before my door. In half an hour, and Quinn drove up in his modest sedan almost at the same time. Sergeant Costello, looking mystified but concealing his wonder with the inborn reticence of the professional policeman, came into the office close on Kinnan's heels. "What's all this nonsense, Trowbridge?" Mr. Richards asked. "Why couldn't you come over to my house instead of dragging me out this hour o' night?" Tut, Mr. de Grandin cut him short, running the admonitions so close together that they sounded like the exhaust of a miniature motor boat. Tut, Mr. Is it not worth a short trip in the cold to have these back?" From a brown paper parcel he produced a purple velvet case which he snapped open dramatically, disclosing an array of scintillating gems. "These, one assumes, were once the property of Madame your wife?" "Great Scott!" gasped Richards, reaching for the jewels. "Why, you got him." "But naturally, Mr. The Frenchman deftly drew the jewelry out of Richards' reach. "And also I have these." From another parcel he drew a sheaf of engraved stock certificates. "You said $20,000 worth, I believe?" "Bien. There are here just $21,000 certificates, according to my count. Monsieur Kinnan," he bowed to the other visitor, "permit that I restore to you the cup of Monsieur le Marquis de Lafayette." The Lafayette cup was duly extracted from another package, and handed to its owner. And now, de Grandin lifted an oblong pasteboard box of the sort used for shoes, and held it toward us as a prestidigitator might hold the hat from which he was about to extract a rabbit. "I will ask you to give me the close attention. Regardes, il vous a US plate. Is it not this you gentlemen saw in your respective houses?" As he withdrew the box lid we beheld lying on a bed of crumpled tissue paper what appeared to be the perfectly modeled reproduction of a beautiful hand and wrist. The thumb and fingers, tipped with long, almond-shaped nails, were exquisitely slender and graceful, and the narrow palm, where it showed above the curling digits, was pink and soft-looking as the underside of a La Friend's rose petal. Only the smear of collodion across the severed wrist told us we gazed on something which once pulsed with life instead of a marvelously exact reproduction. "Is this not it?" he repeated, glancing from the lovely hand to Richards and Kinnan in turn. Each nodded a mute confirmation, but each forbore to speak, as though the sight of the eerie, lifeless thing before him had put a seal of silence on his lips. "Tras bon." He nodded vigorously. "Now, attend me, if you please. When Monsieur Kinnan told me of the hammer which broke his window, I decided the road by which to trace this bodiless burglar was mapped out on that hammer's handle. Pourquoi? Because this hand which frightens sick ladies to death and breaks window panes is one of three things. First, he ticked off on his fingers it may be some mechanical device. In that case I shall find no traces. But then again it may be the ghost hand of someone who once lived, in which case, again, it is one of two things, a ghost hand, per se, or the reanimated flesh of one who is dead. Or, perchance, it is the hand of someone who can make the rest of him invisible. Now, then, if it is a ghost hand, either true ghost or living dead flesh, it is like other hands, it has ridges and valleys, and loops and whorls, which can be traced and recognized by fingerprint experts. Or, if a man can, by some process all unknown to us, make all of him except his hand invisible, why, then, his hand, too, must leave fingerprints. Hein. Now, Jules de Grandin, I say to me, is it not highly probable that one who steals jewels and stocks and bonds, and the cup of Monsieur le Marquis de Lafayette, has stolen things before, perhaps been apprehended and finger-printed? Parbleu, it may be even, as you say, Jules de Grandin, I reply to me. Thereupon I take that hammer from Monsieur Kinnan's house, and go with him to police headquarters. Monsieur le Préfet, I say to the commissioner, I would that you permit your identification experts to examine this hammer, and tell me, of their kindness, whose fingerprints appear thereon. Bien. He is an amiable gentleman, the commissioner, and he gives the order, as requested. In due time comes the report. The handle of that hammer bears the manual autograph of one Catherine O'Brien, otherwise known to the police as Catherine Levoy, and also as Catherine Dunstan. The police have a dossier for her. She was in turn a shoplifter, a decoy woman for some Badger game gentleman, a forger, and the partner of one Professor Mysterio, a theatrical hypnotist. Indeed, they tell me, she was married to this Professor Italianic, and with him she traveled the country, sometimes giving exhibitions, sometimes indulging in crime, as, for instance, burglary and pocket-picking. Now, about a year ago, while she and the professor were exhibiting themselves at Coney Island, this lady died. Her partner gave her a remarkable funeral, but the ceremonies were marred by one untoward incident. While her body lay in the mortuary, some miscreant climbed through the window and removed one of her hands. In the dead of night he severed from the lovely body of that wicked woman the hand that has so often made away with others' property. He made away with it, nor could the efforts of the police trace him or it to his place of hiding. Meanwhile, this Professor Mysterio, he who was the woman's partner, has retired from the stage and lives here in New Jersey on the fortune he has amassed. New Jersey, New Jersey, I say to me when I hear this. Why, this is New Jersey. So the good Sergeant Costello and I make a survey. We find that this ci-devant professor lives out on the Andover Road, where he does nothing for a livelihood but smoke a pipe and drink whiskey. Come, let us take him in, the sergeant says to me. Now, while we ride out to the professor's house, I do much thinking. Hypnotism is thought, and thought is a thing which does not die. If this deceased woman had been habituated to obeying mental commands of this Professor Mysterio, had been accustomed to obey those orders with all parts of her body as soon as they were given, had she not formed a habit pattern of obedience? Trowbridge, my friend, you are a physician, you have seen men die. Do you know that the suddenly killed man falls in an attitude which had been characteristic in life, is it not so? I nodded agreement. Very well, then. I ask me if it is not possible that the hand this professor had commanded so many times in life cannot be made to do his bidding after death. Mundieu, the idea is novel, but not impossible for that reason. Did not that so superb Monsieur Poe hint at some such thing in his story of the dying man, who remained alive because he was hypnotized? Assuredly. So, when we get to the professor's house, Costello points his pistol at the gentleman and says, I make you arrested, and meanwhile I search the place. In it I find Monsieur Richard's jewelry and certificates, also the cup of Monsieur Le Marquis de Lafayette. I also find much else, including this hand of a dead woman which is not itself dead. Dieu. When I go to take it from its case, it attacked me like a living thing, and Costello have to promise he will punch Professor Mysterio in the nose before he order it to be quiet. And it obeyed his voice. Mordieu, when I see that I have the flesh of geese all over me. Rot. Richards flung the comment like a missile. I don't know what sort of hocus-pocus made that hand move, but if you expect me to believe any such nonsense as the stuff you've been telling, you've got the wrong pig by the ear. I shouldn't be surprised if you and this Professor What's-his-name were in cahoots, and you got cold feet and left him holding the bag. I stared aghast at the man. De Grandon's vanity was as colossal as his ability, and though he was as gentle as a woman in ordinary circumstances, like a woman he was capable of sudden flares of vixenish temper, in which his regard for human life became no greater than his concern for a troublesome fly. The little Frenchman turned to me, his face as pale as a dead man's, the muscles of his jaws working. Friend Trowbridge, you will act for me, of course? He asked in low, husky voice. You will, huh? With the ejaculation he dodged suddenly, almost falling to the floor in his haste to avoid the flashing white object that dashed at his face. Nor was his dodge a split second too soon. Like the lid of a boiling kettle, the top of the shoebox had lifted, and the slim quiescent hand that lay within leaped through the opening and hurtled across intervening space, like a coral from a crossbow. All delicate, firm-muscled fingers outspread, it swooped like a hawk, missed de Grandon by the barest fraction of an inch, and fastened itself, snapping like a strong springed steel trap, in the puffy flesh of Willis Richards' neck. IULP. The startled financier gasped, as he stumbled backward, tearing futilely at the eldritch thing which sank its long and pointed nails into his purpling skin. Ah God, it's choking me. Costello rushed to him, and strove with all his strength to drag the clutching hand away. He might as well have tried to wrench apart the clasp of a chrome steel handcuff. Non, de Grandon shouted, not that way, Sergeant. It is useless. Leaping to my instrument case, he jerked out an autopsy knife and dashed his shoulder against the burly detective, almost sending him sprawling. Next instant, With the speed and precision of an expert surgeon, he was dissecting the deadly white fingers fastened in Richard's dewlap. "It's complete," he announced matter-of-factly, as he finished his grisly task. "A restorative, if you please, French rub bridge, and an antiseptic dressing for his wounds. The nails may not have been sterile." Wheeling, he seized the telephone and dialed police headquarters. "Allo, Monsieur Legiolier," he greeted when his call was put through. "You have one Professor Mysterio in confinement there, yes?" "But certainly, he is booked upon the suspicion the what you call him. Open charge." "How is he? What is it he does?" A pause. Then, you say so. I thought as much. Many thanks, monsieur." He put the telephone back in its cradle and faced us again. "My friends," he announced, "the professor is no more." 2 minutes ago he was heard to cry out in a loud, distinct voice, "Katie, kill the Frenchman, I command you. Kill him." When they rushed to his cell they found him hanging from the grating of the door by his waist belt. The fall had snapped his neck, and he was dead as a herring. ABN, he shook himself like a spaniel emerging from the water. "It was a lucky thing for me I saw that box lid lift itself, when the dead hand obeyed its dying master's last command. None of you would have thought of the knife, I fear, before the thing has strangled my life away. As it is, I acted none too soon for Monsieur Richard's good." Still red in the face, but regaining his self-possession, "Under my ministrations, Mr. Richards sat up in his chair. If you'll give me my property I'll be getting out o' this hell house," he announced gruffly, reaching for the jewels and securities de Grandin had placed on the desk. "Assuredly, monsieur," the Frenchman agreed. "But first you will comply with the law, sce pas. You have offered a reward of $5,000 for your property's return. Make out 2 checks, if you will be so kind, one for half the amount to Sergeant Costello, the other half for me." "I'm hanged if I do," Richard stammered. "Why should a man have to buy back his own stuff?" Sergeant Costello rose ponderously to his feet and gathered the parcels containing Mr. Richard's belongings into his capacious hands. "Law's law," he announced decisively. "There'll be no bonds or jewels returned till that reward is paid, sir." All right, Richards agreed, reaching for his checkbook. "I'll pay it, but it's the damnedest hold-up I've ever had pulled on me." "H'," growled Costello, as the door banged to behind the banker. "If I ever catch that bird parkin' by a fire plug, or exceedin' the speed limit, he'll see a hold-up that is a hold-up. I'll give him every summons in me book and holler for a fresh pad." "Tenez, my friends, think of the swine no more," de Grandin ordered. "In France, had a man so insulted me, I should have called him out and run him through the body. But that one? Poof! Gold is his life's blood. I hurt him far more by forcing the rewards from him than if I had punctured his fat skin a dozen times." Meanwhile, friend Trowbridge, his small blue eyes snapped with the heat lightning of his sudden smile, "There waits in the pantry that delicious apple tart prepared by your so amiable cook. Sergeant, Monsieur Kinnan, will you not join us? A wedge of apple tart and a cold mug of beer, morbleu, it makes a feast fit for an emperor." The end. This audio was brought to you by Yakatome. Voice of the web. YAKITOME.com